providing practical, cutting-edge wisdom, embracing all parts of the human experience into a map of transformation, accelerating soul alignment for individual and collective ascension. We are your hosts, Jonathan Mosenter
and Soraya Rachel,
on
the Relationship Alchemists.
Welcome to episode 0 of our new podcast about transformation. In today's podcast, we are going to review what our podcast is all about, and we're going to get into mine and Rachel's background, as well as what you can expect in future podcast episodes. So let's first get into the main topic of the entire podcast, which is transformation. And we are living in a very interesting times where there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of polarity. We're living through this COVID crisis, and the universe seems to be calling for change, a new way of doing things. A lot of people are frightened, but I actually see these times as the optimal conditions for a major transformation. And our show is all about the how of transformation. And Rachel and I have broken in transformation into a lot of different parts and steps, and our show is really a how-to show. And there's a primary focus on the individuals because society is actually built up of a lot of individuals. And I've discovered along my path, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, about this thing about having gnosis or knowing or clarity, this ability to tap into our intuition, to be radically here, but yet radically connected to everything, and to really to be guided by a higher force that's beyond the mind. And Rachel and I are experts at helping people guide us so they can have their own knowings. We're very passionate about helping people identify that for themselves. Additionally, we've got some expertise, particularly me and my background in organizational change, about how systems, culture, and systems also change. So that will also be a part of the program, although the main part, certainly at first, will be around this helping people choose clarity. Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about that and also about how we're breaking things down?
Yeah, I was just going to point that clarity and gnosis are also sometimes nicknamed Buddhahood. So it's an opportunity for us to talk about what that state is and what it is not, and why the distinction is important. For example, it's not omniscience.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of people think, you become a Buddha. It's not omniscience. It's about actually knowing clarity for yourself about what you should be doing in the moment without a shadow of a doubt.
I feel as though it is connected to this certain belief about what reality is, that it's here to evolve you, and it's constantly supporting your learning and your education that evolves you into your highest expression of being. And so in that sense, the gnosis or clarity we're talking about is very local to you as an individual and to what is going to further you and what your highest next steps are.
Yes, and also that gnosis can guide you to work with other people in collaboration. So that while there's an individual component, people with gnosis is frequently guided, towards working with other people to collaborate something that's bigger than themselves.
Another perspective that we pull from has come from parts work, and it's something that we learn growing up, but that I don't know that people are really tuning into the broader application of, which is the first, second, and third person perspectives, the 3 different kinds of way that books are written. And this, if we take it into the meta level that we discuss from in the show, plays out as the first person being a category around self-awareness, because when we speak from the first person, we declare things about ourselves, whether they're true, whether they're culturally programmed. Every time we speak I am, we are creating some sort of karmic momentum and relationship with what our self is. and what our self is here being. And so in the self-awareness category, one of the three categories that we kind of play within is one of our primary buckets. There are things like inner inquiry, self-reflection, journaling, mirror work. And Jonathan, you have a strong orientation from the energy perspective and building habits and lifestyle and how much that creates availability.
Yeah, values, your meditative state development, for example, also goes in this bucket.
Yeah. And so then when we have a certain level of self-awareness, we can move to second person perspective, which is the interpersonal awareness. It's the part of us that emerges when we're in relationship. It's the aspects of our being that come into play when we're in groups of people. And when we're in relationship, it can be with intimate lovers all the way to acquaintances. These kind of interpersonal awarenesses and skills, as far as how to be heard, how to be seen, how to reflectively listen, all kind of fall into the second person bucket.
Yeah, and also this is not just about one-on-one. This is about group dynamics, organizational dynamics. The U category is about people working together, and there's a lot of codes and known models that make that seem more seamless and more effortless than a lot of people who struggle with that.
And then the third person perspective in writing would be when there's a narrator talking about what's happening. And the narrator in those books, they're not a character in the novel, they're the witness. And that level of spaciousness between ourselves and what's happening is a perspective that we can actually hold as a lens on life. It's called meta-awareness. And there are a lot of spiritual laws and concepts that operate at this level that affect the way that we relate to life. And it has a lot to do with reverence and that life is happening for, with, and through us rather than to us. And it's at this level that we can really step beyond the ego, beyond the smaller self, and start to take in a lot broader of a perspective lens.
Yeah, meta perspectives also includes metaphysics. And meta is really just kind of means like kind of going above and seeing patterns. And this is one of the superpowers that Rachel and I have, is we have this strong ability to kind of reflect, be a little bit detached from things, and that helps us go more into things and be more embodied, actually. And when we go more meta, we're allowed to see patterns that exist within themselves, patterns that exist in like how the mind works, how an individual works, how couples work, how family dynamics work. And a lot of the show is going to be talking about identifying these different patterns and getting into right relationship with the patterns. I want to talk about our name, the Relationship Alchemists, and some people think we're about couples work, and that's only a small part of what we're here to talk about. When we're talking about relationship, we're talking about the relationship of the observer, ourselves, with some part of life. And the more we are in a kind of an optimized, aligned relationship with different parts of life, we have more energy, we have more coherence, we have a higher vibration, and that leads to a better experience. And so Rachel and I have spent our lives really studying different aspects, which we're going to get into, that help us identify these different codes, these meta perspectives that allow us to have a more positive, vibrant relationship to life in itself by looking at the different parts and how they interrelate and how we relate to the parts. And so that's going to be a big part of the show, is getting into these individually.
And when we come into right relationship with these parts, we increase our coherent energy, which means more of us is working with the flow of life instead of against the flow of life. And that enables us to have a lot more energy to make our dreams come true, to step into conscious creatorship, to claim our authentic power and our sovereignty, rather than being pulled into these parts of us that need additional love or integration. And so what we hope for the audience is that they will achieve more coherent energy through the breadth of perspective that we have to show up with and expand people with, and that more conscious creators will be born.
Absolutely. And I want to coherent energy, and this is going to be a topic we're going to revisit over and over again because of all the like meta perspectives I've taken. This at the core of it, when you get coherent energy, your life starts getting better and better. So coherent energy has two different components to it. There's like the amount of energy we have, but then there's the direction of the energy. And we're going to talk about how do we build both. So there we're going to talk about energy in ways that I don't think people ordinarily think about energy. For example, just perspective taking is a big shift in energy. If you're seeing things in a more positive light, like life is working for you, your energy to life is going to be way higher than if you think everyone's out to get you and you're kind of in a victim state of mind. So the energy plays out in perspective taking. There's like building of physical energy. There's like food, supplements, health. It's also our relationship to life, relationship to politics. For example, I talked about earlier in the show, if you were like, well, I know a lot of people who's really depressed right now who thinks the world's going to hell and because of the polarity and the COVID and just everything that's going on in the newspaper is very negative. And I actually think this is an epic time to be alive. Like this is a time to witness amazing transformation. I feel so lucky and fortunate to be part of this and to be part of this upswing. And you could see my energy. It brings a lot more enthusiasm when you have that perspective versus when you think, everything's going in a negative way. So that's just one example. And we're just going to start talking about energy a lot.
Yeah, just to riff on that a little more, when people are comfortable and content, they're often not motivated to change. And our society is designed to create as much of that as possible for people. And so as people become more tolerant of discomfort because it's an inevitable part of reality, then that increased availability to discomfort actually allows them to expand into new ways of being, new perceptions of reality, new orientations towards life that previously may have been locked in place due to what that perspective gave them as far as like a comfort feedback, as far as like a groove or a pattern of being. And so it is this place in our life where there is developing availability for shift, for evolution, for change. And yeah, we're excited to contribute to that momentum.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're here about helping people make their individual and collective dreams come true. I want to be in a world where everyone can express themselves authentically and give their God-given gifts and have other people appreciate their in peace and happiness. And I think we all know that world is possible. And our whole process is going to be around how do we get there? What are the steps to actually break through that? And a lot of that, I talked about clarity, and we'll talk about this before, but a lot of this is actually getting into some psychology because there's some meta patterns around how people are wounded when they're young just because, they're new to life and they don't know how to take things and they carry these wounds with them and it affects how they relate to the world. And so there's a big leverage, as I call it, a very high leverage moment to deeply understanding the mind and how to transcend the traps of the minds. And if we had systems and cultures where everyone sort of understood this as part of the hero's journey, I think we will have an epic world. And I know that world's possible, and Rachel and I are excited to be part of it.
Absolutely. And with that, let's get a little bit into our backgrounds. Jonathan, what qualifies you to be such an enthusiastic speaker on the topic of transformation?
So transformation is in my blood. I grew up in a home where both my parents were social workers, and one of the huge benefits of that was they talked about psychology a lot, and I would say that was my original mental model. They were skeptical of religion and their teachings. They both have masters of social work, help them to orient around a world of psychology and how to be a proactive change. And that was just driven into me at a young age. And then as I actually started working in the field of psychology, and I realized I wanted to have a big impact on the world, and just working with individuals who had a lot of problems. I was working in a group home with emotionally disturbed kids. And I started to get exposed to like systems dynamics and how the system was preventing even me to do a great job. And I started to get really interested in like organizational psychology, and I kind of shifted gears. I actually had previously some experience in organizational behaviors. I had majored in both business and psychology has kind of been my focus of life. And I shifted my studies into a field of development called organizational development. Some people call it change management, but the focus is on the process of change. It is a how-to change. It's a lot of people traditionally think it's a corporate thing, but as soon as I got into it, I immediately saw that all the tools are doing is just how can we get people to work together better. And there are different components within organizational development. There's a kind of working with individuals like coaching, and there's like team development, or there's working with like organizations and how do you get them all like what's called alignment work. And I've been in that since I'm 50 years old now, and I've been doing that since I was my mid-20s. And at some point, I was doing that field for a while. I'm a continuous learner, so I was always learning new cool things about organizational development and transformation. Just to show you kind of how nerdy I get, like once I get really into something. So someone said something like, once Jonathan's into something, he's really into it, like really like passionate and focused. And so actually, right as I was learning organizational development, I actually started a whole organization for people to learn about organizational development. And this was highly unusual because almost everybody in the field was like 40 plus, and I was like, I don't know, 27, something like that at the time. And I launched a whole group, and it was just my passion, and we all taught each other about organizational development. Anyways, I kept learning, and at some point I just felt in my soul I was meant to be an entrepreneur around people learning about transformation. And then I started to try and do that while I kind of had another job, an organizational job. And anyways, I for the life of me, I couldn't get this entrepreneurial gig off the line. I was kind of stuck. And also in my romantic life, I was kind of serially in a lot of short-term relationships, even though I really craved a passionate long-term partner. It wasn't happening for me. And got to a point, I think it was in my late 30s, I was starting to get to a point where I was like sick of being stuck. I had this kind of like enough of this vibe. And that's where I kind of decided I'm going to do things differently. And I started doing a lot of audiobooks. And one thing I really learned about through audiobooks, I got really into something called integral theory, which is about these meta tools. It's this idea of kind of Ken Wilber, who invented it, looked at a lot of different perspective lenses, east, west, materialism, spirituality, and he went above it and he found these patterns that really combined everything. And also he looked at spirituality in a different way. I'd always associated spirituality with religion. And so he helped me see it as more like truth or seeing different patterns. And it really opened up my door in terms of like spirituality. And it also exposed me to meditation. And as a tool, I mean, I heard of it, but I didn't really know what it was, but the benefits of it. And I'd always struggled with attention deficit disorder. I'd been somebody who was just all over the place. I had a lot of interests, but I was never able to really channel the focus to get the thing I really wanted, some of the things I really want to do, like this new business. And I just decided, hey, I'm gonna meditate. And I turned 40, and actually it happened right before I turned 40. I literally said I'm never going to be the same again, and I changed my diet, I changed my exercise, and then I took a Tibetan meditation program with Dan Brown. I studied Mahamudra, and Dzogchen is the kind of Tibetan Vajrayana lineage from the third wheel. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was going to an integral theory meetup group, and the leader of it, my friend Ted Sod, said, hey, I've been doing this meditation. I think it'd be really good for you. And I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought I was just going to get a little concentration, but I went to this 8-day retreat, And boom, it totally changed my life. It changed my whole perspective on reality. I got to know later these Tibetans kind of live in a place where it's hard to get to and it's got a lot of bad weather, so they were able to go inward for thousands of years. There's like these cave yogis, and they just studied how the mind operated. And it turned out Buddhism is less of a religion and more of like a liberation of the traps of the mind. And they observed things about the mind that were simple and profound, and I never would have thought to think of it that way in a million years. And it helped me kind of reconceptualize about what this reality might be. One piece is like this idea of me being like an individual self as a body and like a history versus kind of being in the moment and being this field of awareness. And that helped me kind of take this witness perspective. This kind of concentration meditation, one of the key benefits is to start to disidentify with your thoughts, your feelings, sensations, and the experience reality, and take this more meta perspective.
Yeah, I just wanted to have you speak more to that and what the kind of evolutionary process that is outlined through your tradition with Buddhism.
Absolutely. So what they have a very specific protocols of how to transcend these loops and traps of the mind and how you can kind of connect to everything and be radically present and be able to just kind of know what to do. So they call it direct knowing. And the process breaks down kind of like this. There's a process of really concentration first. And the reason why concentration is first is the problem is that most people really identify with their continuous thoughts, feelings, sensations, emotions, and they think that they are them, and they don't have any ability to take other perspectives on the things that are going on within their own system. And so concentration helps you to disidentify, gives you a little bit of space between the thoughts, feelings, sensations, emotions, and connects you with an observer, who can then take perspectives on that. As like, oh, I just had that feeling. Is that valid? Do I want to, where is this coming from? It allows you to kind of ask different kind of questions. And then the next set of protocols in that is something called insight practices. And insight practice is to look into the nature of the mind. So it's like we actually meditated on, like, what is a thought? What is consciousness? What is an emotion? And they do something called a pointing out style, which is they will point out what they observed, and you see for yourself. Is that something you're seeing too? It's kind of volunteerism approach, because it's not saying like, hey, I'm right. It's kind of saying like, hey, this is what we've been seeing through a lineage teaching that goes back 5,000 years. And if you buy into kind of these things, then you have a choice. It's kind of, but the goal is to have a direct experience, so you know it for yourself. You're not just like taking what they're saying for granted. So the pointing out instructions are more like questions. It's like, where does a thought come from? Where does a thought go? And you can make up your own conclusions. But what it helped me do is actually to not only see the thought as I'd seen it before, but also, for example, see it as information. And the same thing for other parts of life. So it allowed me to have this multi-perspectival view on my inner experience. So not only was it have the impression I had before, but I also could see it as just information, which could have multiple interpretations. So they have these things called, a lot of people call them emptiness practices, but my teacher says probably openness is a better translation, because the goal is to then look at the information from many perspectives. And the way to ultimately master the mind is not functioning at its highest when it's trying to push certain experiences away or trying to make more of it. It actually works the best when you actually just be with things as it is, and you let them self-arise in your consciousness and then let them go away on their own. That's how they naturally do it. It naturally does it unless some part of us interferes. And what's also kind of cool is a teacher I studied with much later. His name is Donnie Epstein, and he's an energy master. And he thinks of the world through an energy lens. He actually talks about as a kid, he actually saw the world like through energy streams, and he couldn't even see like people's faces that clearly. And later that came on, but he came with this natural genius, like bringing some deep understanding the world through an energy perspective. And when I understood Donnie's teachings, I was able to actually understand what was happening in the Tibetan Buddhist meditation. So he talks about these two kinds of energies. One is called unbound, and the other is called bound. And the unbound is this like pure energy, and the bound is just energy that has already got a form. So anything that's got a form, like a thought, feeling, our interpretation of reality. And so when we're able to bring this unbound pure energy to our experience, then we will have like a higher interpretation. When you're just seeing the world through your existing interpretations of your thoughts and feelings, then you're bringing bound to bound, and that's not going to get you necessarily new ways of doing things. But if you're bringing this unbound, so you're doing this emptiness practice, openness practice, where you're allowing to see the reality through a pure energy instead of just how you've seen it in the past, then you allow yourself to have new interpretations. You're moving beyond your past reference points. And so this Tibetan meditation showed me kind of an outline of what could be. And I want to remind you, it's a practice, and it's a whole other orientation to reality. And so it does take different practices. And one thing that happened with me is I really focused on the concentration for probably about 4.5 years only, because I had really extreme ADD. And I really, as much as I understood the higher practices, I couldn't hold them in a moment-to-moment basis. And then one thing I did discover once I started to do this meditation was I started to have some kind of knowing or gnosis that was beyond my local mind. And I remember, I'll never forget this first experience. I'm sitting in front of the computer. I'm on Facebook, and basically I'm scrolling through, and someone posts something about a movie, and some part of me goes, "Hey, you got to watch that." And I was like, "Whoa, who said that?" Because it wasn't coming from my local mind. And I was like looking around the room. No one else was in the room. So I'm in my apartment alone. And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." and I kind of surrendered to it. I was like, I guess I got to watch it. And that movie literally changed the direction of my life. It was pointing to some more alternative ideas about reality. And I started going into YouTube and looking at alternative ways about our politics system and energy. And it was like kind of like my moment of going, maybe the Tibetan class was the start of me going down the quote unquote proverbial rabbit hole. And then then this movie kind of took me in a whole other direction. The movie was Thrive. It was a movie, so it talked about how the money system worked and energy and UFOs and stuff like that, things like I knew almost nothing about. So I was kind of open about it and have a lot of biases. But what happened was this gnosis, this kind of blast of knowing. First, it came like once in a blue moon, and then as I got older and more advanced at the practice, it started coming more frequently. And I've been going through this decade-long process of moving from being this analytical guy who's kind of like coming up with pros and cons and percent chance to somebody who just trusts my intuition. And I wanted to point out one more kind of area of this before we kind of switch over to kind of Rachel's background. But what became clear at some point was that the Tibetans had done this, showed people how to become a Buddha in a very specific way. And at some point it became clear to me after like 4.5 years, the gnosis started to come on a little bit stronger, and I started to get more and more guidance, and I was guided to different modalities and tools. I was like, hey, if you try this out, it's going to enhance your practice. And so I got guided to do into a very esoteric chi practice. And then at some point I got guided to get into like altered states like psychedelics, and like ayahuasca was like a first one. And each of these things like rapidly kind of enhanced what I was doing, my this process of becoming a Buddha. And then I also got deeply into shadow work and parts work. And eventually I got led to this guy, Donnie Epstein, who's like a master of energy and showed how to really direct the energy. And later I got into something called conscious language. And and those are just some of the big ones. I can't tell you how many different kinds of modalities I've tried and experienced. And what I found is I have a really gift at an open mind of trying new things, and also how to synthesize them together with not only with each other, but with the Buddha path, and how to get this gnosis. And I find that if you bring these different kind of modalities together in a new way, we can go a little bit faster than the Tibetans had done it. And that's kind of one of Rachel and I's bonding points, is we both real passionate about the transformational path, and also experimental with different modalities.
Jack of all trades, you might say.
Jack of all trades, but master of helping people in the process of change. And so there's a lot I could say, and I'm going to say a lot more about my history on further programs, but this is just to give you a basic outline of kind of where I'm coming from. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rachel. Where on your transformational story would you like to start people?
Definitely early childhood, kid of imagination, and who read many books. And we kind of gave you an idea earlier about that first, second, and third person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like to say one of the unique things about my story is that I kind of started in the third person. I came in with a really open sense of self that kind of evolved as a product of my environment, but with how many different kinds of perspectives I was taking in at such a young age, reading as much as I did, I feel like this meta-awareness was a natural lens towards life. I had a degree of distance and a degree of looking at the themes and the plot arcs and the mythic paths that people were exploring, and developing this place of acceptance and non-judgment in the observation of them. And I also moved around a lot growing up, a lot around various corners of the Midwest, a little Bible Belt, and then even some French Canada. And I think I probably met and had intimate conversations with more people before the age of 18 than some people in rural America have in their entire life. I like to think that has created a perspective breadth, a perspective lucidity, or like a neuroplasticity in the way that I communicate, in the way that I understand language. And just like Jonathan was kind of mentioning towards the end of his story about his ability to try new things, I think that is also one of my superpowers, is when I meet someone new, I can empathize on the level of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, where I'm like, a slight tweak in this value and a couple early life choices different, and I would be that person, and to really feel that. So I think I bring a lot of empathy and a lot of heart. And growing up, I had a lot of pressure to develop my sense of self, and I kind of delayed that as long as possible. In college, I was an advertising major because I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to have to let people know I'm doing it. So I developed some graphic design skills and some advertising skills, and learned a lot about psychology and how to visually encapsulate concepts, and used that as a underground of what became the journey of my 20s. A huge path of self-discovery where I was taking every quiz on the internet, trying to figure out who I wanted to become, because I'd left the scripted path of reality. I had done the summa cum laude and walked at college, and now it was time to make some choices. And I was full of perspective, full of potentiality. You know, I'd been judged my entire life, or held in esteem my entire life, for the amount of potential I had. And at some point that potential has to actualize, and you have to step into conscious creatorship. the one that I think really kind of calmed that journey for me, that gave me a solid enough sense of self that I was like, okay, I can ground from this, was when I was exposed to Gene Keys and through it human design. It gave me a linear approach of how to ground in essence and virtue and values and ways of being that were beyond the specifics of what I was actualizing as. And it created this harmonic undercurrent for me to begin to weigh what was happening in my reality against, and to kind of ground a consistent way of being that could allow the universe to inform what it became. And I like to say that all that exploration of self that I went through in my 20s kind of gave me shapeshifter powers. You know, I was kind of that social butterfly or social bee that kind of cross-pollinated between a lot of different ways of being. One could hypothesize that perhaps coming from this third person lens, I was a little disassociated as a child, and that eventually led to a deep grounding journey of coming into my presence through divination and flow arts and yoga. And just to speak a little bit about that, I've endearingly nicknamed myself a space-time priestess, because divination, it has this way of, yes, it looks into the past and looks into the future, but it's grounding you in what in the present moment is going to change in order for your relationship to those things to change. So it really does have this way of pulling you back into your present autonomy. And so that's how my time access finally grounded, and that culminated in a 3-year stint with the Cincinnati Circus Company.
I was wondering if you could, because one of the things we really share in common in the divination, the tarot, and the oracle cards, and the other kinds of forms that you use is this transpersonal knowing, this knowing beyond the mind. I was wondering if you could talk about what made you trust that.
Okay, weaving back into earlier childhood a little bit, I actually had my first taste of gnosis was before, because I lived a very sheltered childhood, before I had any major traumas to cast illusions upon reality from. And I had a very traditional Catholic upbringing, and in confirmation between 7th and 8th grade, I received the Holy Spirit, which is essentially the fire of gnosis. And for me, I came in with so much belief and faith that was actually a very real experience. I remember from that point on having a voice inside my head that knew everything, was literally best friends with God, and the Akashic records were just speaking to me, and it wanted me to write a book on God and energy being the same thing, and it fed me things to say when I followed my friends home to convert their parents to this newfound perspective that I was espousing. And it was like having a really super intelligent best friend and having conversations about like all these stories in my mind, and my European history teacher saying that was the so-and-so conflict of 1782 and that's a real thing. And I'm like, cool. I'm glad you're intrigued. So yeah, that was kind of my first taste of gnosis. But like I said, most people don't get a taste that young. They earn it after they peel back the illusions and the traps of the mind. And so I'm kind of on the quest to reground or attune to the frequency of that on a regular basis. And divination became a way of doing just that. When we achieve gnosis directly and interiorly, it's kind of like the masculine form of gnosis. It's very immediate. But divination is kind of a feminine form of gnosis because it's through the external and through Earth, through the reality matrix, through Mama Gaia, through reading the energy of what's present. And so for me, divination was a way of communing with that same force and using an object, for example, tarot, as the conversational medium through which that conversation occurs outside of the mind. And it's because I hadn't fully finished clearing my mind, but the relationship was still there wanting to be expressed, and it found this tool to continue the dialogue until it could re-internalize. And I also explored things like palmistry, which is very self-awareness creating, and looking at, with your dominant and non-dominant hand, like what is the script life gave you and what is what you've made of it becoming. And yeah, as I was beginning to get into that, eventually led to me joining the Cincinnati Circus Company, where I was teaching tarot workshops and showing people how to get in touch with their gnosis through objects and through external reference points. And eventually, after I moved to Colorado, ended up exploring this new way of connecting people to gnosis with Jonathan. But to get back into this space-time access, the tarot and these other sorts of divination tools, they really help you come to the now moment. But there's this other access of presence, which is here. And to be here now is to not be in the abstract of other people's realities, the world's narrative. Here is in our physical bodies. It's in our spine. It's in what grounds us in this reality and how gravity impacts that. And so getting more involved with yoga, and eventually that leading to flow arts, which is dancing with props and also expresses as fire spinning. It really gave me this relationship to my energy as being in the core of my being, which, as someone who was constantly in this witness perspective, I don't think before that my energy was truly home in my body. I think I was kind of in my outer aura, and it's almost like the world was a virtual reality and I was watching it on a screen. And when I started grounding into my body more, I had this active awakening of what it is to truly see, what it is to truly hear, to actually be present enough in the physical body for these sensory data inputs to speak to us with a degree of synchronicity and magic. And it's that kind of coming aliveness that I really love to see people light up about, to realize, oh, like I've been using my ears, but I haven't been listening, like what is the subtle delineations that become apparent to us only after we step across the threshold.
I was wondering, you mentioned before about self-assessment tools and helping people with self-awareness. Is there one particular that really has really been super impactful that you wanted them to talk about?
For me personally, I did mention the Gene Keys earlier, but I think journaling has been a huge self-awareness tool. There's this way in which when you're operating as awareness rather than as a character within reality, that you become disconnected to how is the frequency of my energy connecting to the world. And when you write, you encode what's going on inside of you into something that you can read, and that gives you a feedback of self that I don't know if we value enough in our culture. There's been times when I had some sort of meditative edge that some program was calling me to explore, and it was hard for me to corner myself into it. Like, some part of me was nervous, like I know this is going to be challenging. And if I wrote about the experience of me meeting that edge, it gave me just enough distance to co-create and fall into the moment of completing that assignment or having that discovery. And there's this way in which, whether we write and journal in the first, second, or third person, can also create a lucidity of perspective that creates new awarenesses. And additionally, even beyond like what we conceive of as journaling as far as free form sentences, there's also writing down data about yourself and beginning to monitor these various points that you want to evolve within your being, and collecting things like weight on a given day, sleep on a given day, heart rate, like tracking. That when we track through journaling becomes a huge leverage point for self-understanding. Was there something else?
No, just
some of the lineages that I might just want to mention as having been really pivotal in my journey, shamanic journeying, where you're having a consistent drumbeat as you go into inner visual imagination, was a super strong relationship for me, an opportunity to work with animals and archetypes and various kinds of messengers. When we allow the external reality to educate us, what can be created is limited by what is around us. But when we go into the inner visual imagination of our minds, anything that could possibly want to emerge can emerge because it's not limited by physical reality. So the uniqueness of who we are comes out, and it doesn't need a super specific mirror or a super specific teacher to magically be found in outer reality. It can just arrive as such. And so that has been super important. I also have a lot of props to give sound healing and light therapy. I feel like sound healing is slowly up-leveling its research and data to become a non-invasive form of healing that could eventually proactively heal a lot of what modern medical science heals after the damage is already done. And for me, I had so much energy trapped in my body that just the vibrations alone kind of shook free and allowed to move. And a part of that is also authentic movement, allowing your body to move in the way that it desires, needs, without bringing the mind into the equation and deciding what form it has to take. So that's also super powerful.
Nice. That was a really comprehensive background. Thanks, Rachel. Well, maybe we could give the audience a very succinct kind of background on our relationship and where like it's starting. I'm just gonna mention that after we kind of first met each other, Rachel and I had a really profound experience on New Year's Eve. Rachel was doing some palmistry work, and I was teaching people how to direct energy, and I was calling it's kind of like spell casting because he's energizing the field for a certain result. And we actually that evening she kind of had taken my class and was approaching me about something that was going on with her, and we did a little spell together, a little thing. It was about connecting more with the divine, and I remember when I was doing it, my spirit was like, "Hey, this is as much for you as it is for her." And we kind of did this kind of thing about connecting to the divine.
Yeah, more faith and trust.
More faith and trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then later, when we were together, I had a date called a Chiron return, which happens every 50 years, where Chiron comes in your place, and we had celebrated that, and it's a kind of like a healer's healing his own kind of wound kind of thing, and we had done Rachel and I like to do a lot of ceremonies, and we did a ceremony for celebration of that, and during that I was channeling like a vision for the future, and Rachel was talking about how that was very similar to her vision. It had a lot of alignment, and we were excited to collaborate together.
Yeah, our connection evolved slowly because I was in a place of harvesting a solid takeaway from my years of self-discovery and really transforming that into what do I want my future to look like. And the second that I knew what I wanted, we had plans to hang out that day, and we found this amazing synchronicity like right as I met my moment of clarity, that he was feeling emboldened to state what he wanted more concretely.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like our spell really upped our synchronicity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still playing out that way. Like when we're together, there's a lot more chance happenings and like magic.
Yeah, a lot of synchronicities.
Yeah. So the rewards of collaborating have been vast. To summarize.
Yes. Much more about us individually and collectively, but I'd like to spend the last 10 minutes of the show talking about what people can expect from future shows. Yeah, there's going to be a strong focus on how to transform, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning. There's really going to be a practical show. So this is for really people who's interested in transforming themselves or making a world a better place. We're really going to get into specifics of people who've had success. And it's not going to be just Rachel and I. Sometimes it'll be just Rachel and I talking. But Rachel and I is very well connected. We've just been taking lots of classes with people, developing relationships in the transformational world. We both kind of immerse ourselves like we're kind of people we get, once we get into something, we're really into it deeply. So he's going to have a lot of guests. Rachel, you want to talk about some more stuff?
Yeah. So in discussing the how-to of transformation, there are many paths to Rome, as they say. So there's going to be a lot of exposure to new healing modalities and philosophies, and at what stage of transformation they kind of plug in, some of the strengths and weaknesses of each modality, and kind of give people a flavor of whether it's something that they might want to deepen with, whether this is the key that unlocks their soul as an individual, and what lines and levels of development are really aided by these different techniques.
Absolutely. One of the things that we're going to put a strong emphasis on is this word coherence we mentioned. We're going to have, so we know the end game is to help people individually have clarity to their own gnosis, and collectively we're looking for a society that has peaceful, and everyone can then be their authentic selves, express their gifts, and receive other people's gifts. And so we're going to, when we bring up these, because we're going to bring up a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, but one of the show's through lines is going to be how does this piece actually fit in to this bigger picture, into this through line? Because it's easy to get lost in all the variety, but we're going to really keep a coherent, this piece, this modality, this philosophy helps with this specific aspect, and you need this aspect because it's going to help with this part of the process. So it's really going to be a strong focus on coherence. And also within the coherence, though, we believe variety is a big thing. So variety in all kinds of ways, where we might have shows where have you do some exercises. Rachel and I like to play with format. We want to keep it interesting. I want to give you a full experience, and so you can expect a lot of variety in the format, but within a coherent kind of framework. We might even ask for people to submit questions and answer that. Yeah. Well, Rach?
Yeah, we would love to keep this personally relevant as the audience emerges. If they have feedback for us on what areas are really desiring clarification, or what parts of transformation are really juicy right now. I know that the last podcast we did, our host was really beautiful about kind of outlining some of the core understructure of where mainstream reality is understanding self-work, as far as our cultural relationship to trauma and victim mindset and all these things. So, yeah, we are ready to work with the emergence. And just to round up a little bit too, to tie this all back into the title, Relationship Alchemists, is to not alchemize necessarily exclusively interpersonal relationships, but our relationships with all of life and all the different pieces of the human experience, and to find harmony and alignment and coherence within those. Jonathan, did you want to talk more about?
I was just going to give maybe people some sampling of some show topics they might expect.
Yeah.
So some of the things that Rachel and I mentioned, certainly, like, for example, we'll talk about metaphysics and integral theory, and Rachel mentioned like embodiment practices or self-awareness things like gene keys and human design as two particularly we found a lot of usefulness, conscious language, energy perspectives. Not only energy, physical perspective taking, chi. We're also really deep into the shadow work's a big piece. One thing about the shadows, there's something called a core wound and egoic defense mechanisms, and they're kind of at the heart of a lot of people's challenges. People stuck in certain parts of them that are dominating them, that serve them at a point of trauma in the past, but are no longer people serving in quite the same way. And Rachel and I is specialists at helping people with that difficult challenge, how to use these different modalities to both first identify what your core wounds is and your egoic defense mechanism and what it is and how it's helping you and how it's not helping you, and then how to differentiate between that signal within you and the signal of your heart and your soul that wants to make your dreams come true, and how to kind of listen or kind of heal that wound and like get into the higher energies. That's a particular strength, and there's a lot of different modalities that can help with that. We're also going to talk a lot about subtle energies, like some Reikis, and there's meridians and chakras and quantum healing tools. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, and it can seem really confusing to a lot of people, but I've just because of the studies I've done with the Tibetans and with Ken Wilber and other experiences I have, me and Rachel have this like bigger map of how these things kind of fit together and synthesize. In fact, in our human design, it says that we're actually really good synthesizers as a couple. Maybe we could finish. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Rach?
Yeah, some other aspects that come to mind for me are also like dream work and lucid dreaming, and so many beautiful modalities like emptiness practices, soul sounds. Just we really hit all the chakras. For those of you who know what that is, there's so many levels of reality to pour health and wealth and wellness into, and this is going to be a very comprehensive dive for you all. We're excited.
Yeah, we've experimented with all kinds of programs, even things we haven't mentioned, like Landmark and ISTA and something called like life-centered therapy, and there's so many of them. And we even like get into like tools like the Healy and something called like a Beamer that work with the physical or the quantum field. And we kind of show you how this all comes together, essential oils, I Ching, the list goes on. And also we like to talk about different kinds of spirituality. So we're not like, we're kind of meta. So we'll both look at like, how does like, particularly the esoteric lens of these things, but like Christianity and like the Kabbalah. And we might also like, and that's Judaism, but like Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, Sufism. There's a lot of not just, also we talked about Buddhism, but we really look at how what we've come to notice is how each of them have like a piece of the puzzle, and like what is the best of it, and what can each of, by looking at these different perspectives, and how can they each help us.
Yeah, what do they have to say about the human experience, and then also what they add. Yeah,
and also altered states, which I mentioned, that's another topic we definitely like. How do you make the most of an altered state experience? Is something we definitely want to talk about. And I just wanted to finish the show with just saying how people can get a hold of us, and also I can be reached at my email is Jonathan, JONATHAN at relationshipalchemist, that's plural.com. Soon we'll have our website up, relationshipalchemist.com. Rachel, what's your email?
Rachel at relationshipalchemists, RACHAEL.
Yeah. And also, if you want to contact us about the show, but also Rachel and I have a lot of services. I offer coaching and helping people be one with their soul. That's probably the best way of coaching, but also I could just focus on the meditation or the energy work or the chi or the integral theory. Rachel and I have combination offers where we like to do retreats with people where we bring where we bring a bunch of modalities at once. We also work with couples. Rachel, what else do you want to say about that?
To just say, from my own perspective as a priestess, I guess what I would call my offering at this point is space holding through the lens of love and compassion and all the tools that we have built up, using that to really witness and mirror and bring out the light in people. And I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, we're excited to do more episodes and hear what you guys definitely send us topics you want to hear and questions. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Much love.
So, bye.
As we all take accountability for our energy coherence, we create the world where more is possible. More beauty, more magic, more joy. So let's all step into conscious creatorship together. Sending you omnipresent love.